Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, it's Thursday again, and you are with me, Eddie Phillips, the CEO founder of the Erudition Network. Uh, today, I am we're welcoming our first official um, guest on the show, and I am excited about it because um, he has asked me. He told me when I first started that um, he would come on, and I told him, hold on, because he had just wrote this dynamite book, and I was like, no, wait a minute, let me finish reading this book before before I let you come on. But before we get into and I bring him on screen, I want to say, Passion Razor has been a very big influence with me in my life. Um, Over the last year, I've had so many things that have been going on, and every time I thought that I was just like, I'm not going to do all this. I would always read or see something or hear from him, and it provided me inspiration to continue. And he invited me to speak during the inaugural, to come on for a little bit, and then after that, I came on to talk about history um, with his church for Black History Month. And during that time, many people didn't know I was on a cane. I was hurt, I was injured, and I was going through a lot of things. But I thank him for that. Now, I ain't gonna belabor because I ain't gonna have him that long. So I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna bring him up on here uh, onto the screen so that everybody can see him. Let me see. I click this. Pastor Race, you there? You there?
Yes, I am here.
Cool.
Yes.
So I, you know, I I can only do an introduction about how how grateful I am for you to be on here with us to talk history, to share some knowledge. Um, but I'm gonna let you intro yourself, and for the people who don't know who come on, so they know who you are, and what you do.
Hey, I am Pastor Henry Razor, current senior pastor at what Faith, Hope, and Charity Ministries. We're on Facebook as the Faith Place Chicago or Faith Place Chicago. We're on YouTube as FHC Space TV. We are a growing progressive church in Chicago that teach the word, based from the Bible. But I like this. I use the term progressive, and that term is relative, right? It depends on who I'm talking to and how it's applied. And hopefully, at some point, we'll probably get to defining that as I define it when I say progressive, and as a progressive church and a progressive ministry growing, because I think a lot of things that when I say progressive, I have to look at a lot of things that you are doing, right? And a lot of things that you are doing with Erudition Network, and the things that you're doing are things that I have not been done in the traditional form of church, and I believe that our worship experience and our spirituality, I would just say our religion, but I know people are waiting that they will attack religion as soon as you use the word. So our worship experiences and our spirituality, I think, has to be holistic, right? And as mind, body, and soul. But when we consider it the holistic ability and the holisticness of it, we have to consider that there's a lot of things that probably we should have been dealing with, and we haven't been dealt with. And I think as a progressive ministry, we're willing to go there. We're willing to go where we need to go to save the brothers on the streets that are out there killing themselves, because they're not just killing themselves because they have guns. They're not just killing themselves because they viewed other people as opposition. There were some things that actually resulted, or what we're seeing is the end result of some actions that have been taken and were taken for a long time. And so we're progressive in that regard. I don't ever want to say that we would ever ever walk away from the word of God, because the word of God is the word of God. But what I understand is that for so long, people that have taught the word of God didn't understand the word of God. So they were not teaching the complete word of God, or they were not teaching the things that would benefit us at the time that we needed the benefit, you know. And one thing that I harp on a whole lot is that whenever we go into something, and I use this with the Bible, first get the understanding and the meaning of what you read, and then how you're going to apply it, right?
Yes.
And I think one of the issues that we've seen in the traditional church is that application has been taught as meaning, and that's very detrimental. You know, I tell the people, I have an aunt, and my aunt used to put WD-40 on her elbows and her knees, and she swore that it took the pain away. It took the arthritis away, and she did it. And then when she started doing it, some of my other aunts and uncles started doing it. They said the same thing. Now, you could go out and say, hey, WD-40 is for arthritis relief, right? Because that's how they applied it. But then it wouldn't work for everybody. Because that, right? And why? Because if you go out and say this is what it's for, when it's not, WD-40 is a lubricant, right?
Yes.
And but they applied it a certain way. And see, when you take the scripture and you teach applications, it doesn't work for everybody. Yes. Right? Because you can apply things so many different ways. But when you teach the meaning is the meaning regardless. And so we're progressive in that. And I've been a pastor now for about 19 years, or coming up on 19 years. I've been in the ministry for about 40 years, ministering. I recently, the last 4 years, I became a full-time pastor. Prior to that, I was engineering, fiber optic engineering, and I managed a team of global engineers across the country. I mean, across the world, really, because we were on 5 of the 7 continents. My team was, and we did a lot of the technology things. We were fiber optics. We created the data. We created the backbone systems that the Verizons, the AT&Ts, the Xfinities, those people utilize to actually bring you the services that you use every day on your either your mobile device or on your phone, your digital device. So I spent a lot of time doing that, but at the same time pastoring. But you know, the Lord called me into the ministry, and so He did. So I've written 2 books. And while I said it, well, first book I wrote was Biblically Black and Blessed: God's Relationship with Black People. And that book has proven to be that book was really an eye-opener for me as I began to write it, and as the Lord began to deal with me and the things that I did. It was an eye-opener to me. And then my second book, which I just recently released, and I thank God for it, it's actually doing good. Winning Spiritual Wars, Unleashing the Power of the Soul. And I can see the linkage between just those 2 books, but I can see also the benefit that the people of God, and when I say people of God, I'm talking everybody.
Amen.
And you know, I'm talking everybody. I can see the benefit that people have by reading those books, the knowledge that will be acquired, and you know, by applying the things that you should have a positive outcome and a better response.
All right. Well, you know, I'm glad that you brought all of that up because I was like, man, what did we didn't talk. So I was, in full disclosure, everybody, we didn't talk about what we was going to talk about.
Exactly.
Because Pastor Razor, look, I expect, because you know, we have never physically met, but we talk, and so I know there's a lot to learn here. But I like some what you said there. One of the questions that I had for you, that I wanted to ask, I wrote about 4 questions down, but I specifically, and one of them was, should the church invest time in teaching history? And I think you touched on that in some of the things that you were saying right there. But I guess what I'll add to that is, has the church been good at teaching history within the recent times?
Okay, I will say this. I will say this. I will say that definitely to the first question, the church should invest in teaching history. That has a biblical basis. The God told the children told Israel, when you come out of Egypt, make sure that you tell your children and your children and pass it down through the generation, that they needed to know how they were in bondage and how God brought them out. So I think a large part of what we're seeing in the streets of our cities today, and what we're seeing amongst Black people today, is a lot of the youth is a lack of history. You know, obviously they could not have experienced some of the things we experienced, and we didn't experience some of the things our parents and our forefathers experienced, right? Before that. But for some reason, I think we came up in a generation, and we came up in a time when our parents and grandparents were coming out of such hell and oppressive, that they constantly reminded us of what they were coming out of. They constantly reminded us of how good we have it based upon what they had, right? And I think we see a lot of the younger generations that really don't know the struggle that our ancestors went through to get them to where they are today. So on the one hand, we've got progress in throughout the generation, because we got more than what we ever had. We've got access to more than what we ever had. But then at the same time, we know that we're not where we should be, because equality isn't there, and equity, I should say, isn't there. And and so you have to keep the fight. You have to keep fighting, or else you will get complacent where you're at, and that's not a good thing. So sure, the church needs to invest in teaching history, and then that's just goes along with God telling them to make sure your children, you pass these things down to your children. One time he said, take little phylacteries or little pouches and put this information in. So I don't want them to ever forget. Now, has the church done a good job of doing that? Now that's open for discussion. And let me say, I am part of the church, right? So I don't want to just beat up the church.
No.
But I don't want to beat up the church personally, me. But I think we have to be transparent as church. Now, I think the straight answer to that question from me would probably be no. The church hasn't done enough to teach the history, and to make sure that we are aware of our history, and to make sure that we have the correct interpretation and the biblical interpretation. I say this all the time. A lot of the vestiges of the slave masters' religion to keep us in dominion still makes its way into our teaching and training today, right? So at one time, we do that out of ignorance, right? But there's no need to be ignorant anymore when we understand this, right? So I would say that no, we haven't done enough. But then I want to color that too, is that the church has had so many different issues that we've had to deal with. And we have to be successful in dealing with them to get us to this point that, maybe you can say we didn't prioritize teaching history and put it in the right perspective, the right place. But then at the same time, there were so many other things. We had the church had to teach people to survive. I mean, really, we had to teach people how to come together. Just about every gain or every benefit that we've acquired in America, and I would say since ever since emancipation, has been centered and focused, and the church has been the hub for it. You
Amen.
know, whether it
Yes,
was
sir.
the watch night service that started out in the church because they were free, but the church, when you look at the Reverend George Lees, when you look at the Reverend Dr. King, and when I say the church, I'm gonna talk all spirituality, because
All
you
spiritualities.
look at the Malcolm X and even the Elijah Muhammad. Now, I don't agree with them theologically. I don't agree that they're hermeneutically their teachings in the area of religion, but you cannot deny the fact that they were forces for the movement and for the uplifting of Black people, and in it. So just about everything that we've gained has come through the church, and it continues to come through the church. So so even though we haven't done a good enough job, I think, of bringing that history in and making that history there, a lot of it may have had to do has a lot to do with the fact that when you bring that history in, those that are still empowered, they push back, and
Yeah.
you may end up inadvertently increasing your suffrage
Mm,
at the
mm.
moment. And so you have to make these decisions, you know, am I in this for the long game, or am I in this for just the benefit for right now? And those are hard decisions.
Man, you make a very, you hit some points there. I was reading, I'm always reading, but
Mhm.
the Carter G. Woods's book, the Miseducation of the Negro, and he
Okay.
talked, and in that book, I always try to make sure I'm accurate with the quote, but he talks about that the Negro Church has taken the lead in education in schools on the race. It has supplied a forum and a thought for the highly educated Black person. It has originated a large proportion of the businesses. This is what he said the church was doing.
Mhm.
And that is what traditionally and you make a good point. If people are out here wondering, well, why are you talking about church? The Black church is one of the most strongest, most influential things in the history of mankind. You
Yeah.
cannot talk about history and not talk about the power of the Black church and how it has influenced life here in America and abroad, right?
Mhm.
And so those points, that's why I asked that question, because that's a very good question. But you mentioned Dr. King. And so one of the things that one of my favorite books from Dr. King is Why We Can't Wait. And in that book, Dr. King talks about the military. And it's strong to me because I spent 20 years in the military all over the
Okay.
world.
Okay.
But he talks about how the military, the Black church, had to take on the role, and it had to be the leader in getting the church. Because in his letter from Birmingham jail, he talked to all faiths, right, to
Right.
come in and fight against the oppression that was going on in the country. But one of the things he said is that we are soldiers in the army of God, and because of that, we could be blind, we could be lame of body, we could be. The military has standards. You can't come in if you can't see, and if
Mhm.
you can't hear, and if you can't walk, they're gonna turn you away.
Mhm.
But in the area of spirituality, in the area of social justice, in the area of trying to make this world better, the people of God, the church, uh, has to recruit and should recruit everyone, right? Everyone. And so my point is, do you see that I guess my point is that a lot of times in the churches and in history, we see people choosing who they want to fellowship with, choosing, like, if you the educated, wealthy dude, you come into the church, right?
Mhm.
But what I see with you, and it is such an inspiration, is that you try to inspire people to use what God gave them
Mhm.
in this battle. And I've always wanted to ask you, I know that comes from God, but what inspired you to think like that? Because I'm gonna tell you, it's not a lot of pastors and preachers out there that think like that. You are unique in that, even in your books and the things that you have written. And we're gonna get into that, but that's unique. What got you to think and to be to that point?
Okay, I would say I like what you said. I like the analogy that was used about the military. Right, the military has standards, and but at the church we have to take in, or we should take in everyone. You know, military can reject, and I think the straight to the point analysis of that analogy is that the goal of the military is different than the goal of the church, right?
Okay.
And so whereas the military has a goal of winning battles, getting the best, the fit, right? The goal of the church is to grow the body of Christ and to increase the kingdom of God, right? And so in that, you don't turn away anyone, because
Mm-hmm.
there is room and there is a place. There's not a place in the military for the blind man. You're not going to give him a gun. You're not going to let him fly the plane. You're not going to let him
Yeah.
drive anything. You're not going to let him do anything, right? There's not a place, but there's a place for the blind man in church, right? Because he is as valuable of a soul to Christ as anyone. And then there's also a hope for his healing there also. So the mission is different. But what really probably solidified my focus was my upbringing. I say all the time, I came up in what I would call extreme poverty. You know, there were 15 of us, and we lived in a little 4-room house, little shack. I wouldn't even call it a house. Well, it was a house. I'm sorry about that. I would call it a house, but by today's standard, you know, when you got leaky roof and the water leak goes through the floor and all, you can look through the wood on the floor and see the ground. That's what you're dealing with. But that's how we came up. We didn't have a lot, but we had each other. That was one thing we had. We had each other, and so I can identify with people that feel like they've been overlooked, people that feel like they've been ignored, people that feel like that they've been left behind. And I see in those people the value that God has invested in them just as much as he's invested into the one that has the PhD from the Ivy League school,
Mm-hmm.
or the ones that, you know, God had got there's value there. And I think my focus in ministry was solidified really in the early stages, because I'll never turn people away, because I know how it feels to be turned away. And then if I have experienced any semblance of success, or any semblance of accomplishment, I look at people and say, look, if I can do it, I know you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know, if I can come, I know you can. I know you can come up. I know God can bring you up. And so I look at that, and I see in the people, and some people that other people look away from, I see the possibilities. I see the promise. I see the potential. All it takes is, you know, really, there are very few people who have no ability. There's probably none, right? But sometimes you have to motivate them. Sometimes you have to push them. Sometimes you've got to, and you do that different ways. Sometimes you can coax them into it. Sometimes you have to shame them into it. Sometimes you have to beat them into it. I had a pastor once to say, look, I'm gonna get you all to heaven if I have to grab you by the necks and pull you there, right? You know, but that's my goal. He used to say, that's my goal, is to make sure you get there. And so I'll never turn anybody away, and I'll never do that. But I will say that there are probably more pastors that believe like I believe and do the things that I do than there are not. It's just that in a celebrity driven, when they're in a celebrity driven society, you don't see those people. You only see the mega people. You only see the mega stars. You only see, and so one thing that I purposely do not do, you don't see me reposting things that the mega preachers or the mega stars or the celebrity singers do. You don't see me do those things, especially if I've got a pastor down the street with 15 members and he's preaching the same message. I'd rather promote him because he is reachable. He is reachable to the people. I'll say this, and I'm not a big Stephen A. Smith. I don't know if you know Stephen A. Smith.
Mm-hmm.
He's a sportscaster, and I've never been a really big fan or follower of Stephen A. Smith, but he made a point that stuck with me about 3 or 4 years ago when I was watching television. He made a point, and his point was, parents, you know, you out there at the basketball courts and you're going to all these camps and you're doing all these things, and you just got the dream that your kid's going to be the next LeBron James, the next LeBron James. He said, you know, the chances of your kid ever being the next LeBron James, the chances of your child even making it into the NBA is 1 in a million or 1 in something like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
He said, so you would be best to look at me and take your child and say, look, I'm going to put you in this school and we're going to get your homework and we're going to get you in the school and we're going to get you a degree and get you some work skills. And so you can go out and live a proud life. There's a better chance. And he said that they have a better chance of accomplishing what I accomplished because it's readily attainable to them. He said, I don't want to discourage anyone, but I just want you to be real about it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so so all humans have potential, right? And so sometimes we have to motivate them and we have to show them where their real potential is and go after that and try to build them up. And that's what I do. I'm all about reaching the people that have been overlooked and have been ignored, right? Because they have as much right to be happy and as much right to enjoy success and to experience success as anybody else. So you'll hardly ever see me reposting what some mega person say or what some celebrity preachers say,
Mm-hmm.
something like this. Is especially when I've got there are men and women of God throughout Chicago and throughout America that are sitting in the trenches and they're working and they're doing all they can to lift people up. Those are the people that I want to quote on a daily basis. Those are the people that I want to promote. Those are the people that I want to tell people to look at these people because they're out there working and their experiences. If I had a quarter for everybody that's come to me and said, Pastor, I'm coming to you because I really needed some information. I needed some guidance. And I wanted to go to my pastor, but I would have to go through associate pastor and through a secretary. And they told me by the time I got to him, it was going to be 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks. And I'm telling you what, one guy said, I'll be dead by then.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so there are men and women that are working in the trenches every day. And because we live in a society that's really dominated by celebrity, right? And they're dominated by that. And so you don't hear from the men and women of God that's actually doing the work. You hear from the ones that have the money to actually get on television or go global and do all of these things. And so I do all I can to promote the ones that's actually doing the work and the ones.
And that's what's important. That's what's important. That's what's important. You know, I was thinking today. I saw your video that you put out earlier, and I was like, no, I really appreciate you because you know I know I'm quickly to tell somebody to read this, read that, go here, go look there. Sometimes I'm really bad at it because I'm reading at least 3 books at one time. That's not braggadocious, it's just what I do because it relaxes me. But I was thinking about today because, you know, I most people don't know I've spent most of my adult life working for Intel, right? Intelligence. And so and I was thinking about your book because I really want to get into these books. And one of the things that I was sitting at the job today, and I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna share this because I want people to understand. See, I think sometimes people don't really. I'm not gonna say they don't appreciate the genius of this man. So I'm gonna help y'all to understand the genius of Pastor Razor right here. So he just gave y'all that, but I was thinking about how we process. And please forgive my my writing. I'm doing this right. And so for M, I just put for mission, right? And
Mhm.
so for most of my life, what we were always taught was that in that mission, there is something where we collect, right? We collect information. That be whether you read, that be whatever you do, however you bring it in, what you hear, see, whatever,
Mhm.
feelings, whatever. And so I see a lot of times when I was reading your book, right, I can tell. See, people don't understand when you read those books, whether it be Beautifully Black and Blessed, whether it be Winning Spiritual Wars, that comes from someone who has lived something. And
Mhm.
that has to be appreciated because, see, I in your advertisement, I almost put revelator because, see, you reveal things that a lot of people don't. People could take the revelator for granted, right? They go, well, he just saw. No, they had to live something. They had to understand something. So you're talking about collection, right? And so collection is a huge part of what we do and how we go when we obtain, acquire information, and we make it relevant, right? Because we have to process it.
Mhm.
Transduction, as the psychologists say. But then you got to process that information, right?
Exactly.
You got to be able to process it in your mind. You got to be able to exploit it, right?
Mhm.
How do I, now that I've processed this information, this component, whatever I'm doing, this raw data, how do I make it so I can disseminate that data? In order to do that, that means I have to take a lot of time to analyze whatever God or whatever God gave me, right? And I'm giving y'all just a quick, but this is the process in
Mhm.
order to write these books, right? In order to
Mhm.
live this life. So then I got to analyze and I got to produce something that shows what I collected and what I processed, right?
Mhm.
So now I'm analyzing and now I'm producing something. I'm producing this book. And then I'm going to go out there and I'm going to disseminate it.
Mhm.
I'm going to send these books out there to the world. I'm going to integrate it into society. And I'm going to get people to try to understand what I had to live through these other processes, right? And then in the last part of that, and I know that's where you are right now, right? I have to evaluate, right? I got to
Mhm.
evaluate and I got to see what the feedback is. What am I getting back, right, from this?
Mhm.
And so as I was sitting there today, I was sitting there at the job, I was like, what we gonna talk about? But I said, that is an amazing process. It is a hard process from a person who has lived it for years and having to go in and do that. And often I don't think people really get it's not just writing a book. It's not just talking about something. You got to go through all of those things in order to even get to that feedback. And then go back out again after you've touched and agreed and got people and do it all over again.
Exactly. And that there's a process. There's a process. So basically you input, process, analyze, disseminate, and then feedback, and then you need to incorporate that feedback into
There
the
you
next
go.
cycle, right? And I've been fortunate because the Lord prepared me for where I am now by sending me. I initially was an engineer or a technician first, started engineer with AT&T,
Mhm.
and then I don't know why but the Lord just took me from there to a job at Tel Labs, and the reason I say I don't know why, because I took a pay cut, but it was just something about that job that was just something in my spirit just saying, no, go there, do that, and I actually took a pay cut, and which was silly at the time. It looked silly, it appeared silly, right? And what happened was I went in for an interview, and while I was in there, my resume was sitting on the HR manager's desk. She says, when the VP of training and education for that company came in and said, look, we need people, and you getting all these engineers and blah. And so she said, she told him, said, well, these are engineers that are applying. Nobody's applying for the training job. And my resume just happened to be on the desk. And the VP saw it and said, well, how come you can't have a person like that and let me interview him? She said, because he didn't apply for the job. But then ask him. Well, it just so happened that when she talked to me and I said, oh, I felt led to go in that direction, led of God to go in that direction.
Mhm.
And I ended up going into training where I learned that process.
Mhm.
that you just did. You know, we would do a needs analysis, right? What's needed.
Yes.
And then we do the task analysis, right? What task do I need to focus on to meet the need, right? And then we would actually do it's called, let me give you an acronym here from my days, right? We called it ADDIE, right? You analyze, you design, you develop, you implement, then you evaluate. And then you start that cycle all over again. You analyze, you design, you develop, you implement, and then you evaluate. And I learned that process, and I had the responsibility for that process, right? And that's that. See, and I'm a very logical person. My sister accused me of that, even when I was even in my messages. I'm a very logical person, right? If I believe that God is a healer, then I want to take God to people that are sick.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's logically where he should be, right? So I'm a very logical person. So when I deliver a message, I want people to apply it because I want to evaluate the feedback. I want to make sure that these things should work for you. These things should work for you. These things should work for you. And so that process has really been alive in everything that I do. Analyze, design it, develop it, implement it, then evaluate it. And you get the feedback in the evaluation process, and you implement that, and you start it all over again. And that's exactly that's how I do at the church. You know, that's how I do at the church. That's how I do anywhere else. You know, you really have to do that. You really have to be like that.
Be logical. Be logical.
You have to be logical, right? I'm not an AND gate. I'm not a NAND gate, an exclusive or any of those gates. But I am a logical person.
There you go.
And I remember when I was praying once, and the Lord really laid it on my heart that He was going to heal people. So you know what I did? I went and volunteered at the Cook County Hospital because I wanted the people to know that God's a healer. And if He said He's going to do it, He's going to do it. And things was happening so that one day the doctor stopped me and pulled me over to the side and asked me to pray for them, right? And so I think that we have to get away from what we've known as religion. Because I'm going to tell you, I've actually done some. In my job, I had Muslims that reported to me from Egypt, and I had that reported. One guy was from Morocco, moved, and I'm gonna tell you, some of these guys were closer to me than anybody in the church have ever been. And we were just close like that. So I think we, you know, when we look at that and that process you have, we had an acronym for it. We called it ADDIE. And it's very, very plain and simple. Analyze, design, develop, implement, then evaluate.
And I'm glad, because see, Daniel said, I'm not religious, but this guy is definitely a great pastor, and that's the thing, it reaches out to people. Now, this may look familiar, and please forgive my writing, right? Because you know, I'm using my board for the first time. But I also looked at this today, and this is if you don't know, Pastor Razor wrote a book, Biblically Black and Blessed. It touches on some history, but it's a biblical book. And I was looking at this because, again, I'm gonna say, you know, people look at things and I don't think they get a full understanding. This is very powerful right here, right? This is hugely powerful because what we're talking about here, and this is not even all, right, is about the children of Ham and how what they migrated and what they did, and from Cush, Israel, put even Canaan. And so when we look at all of these cultures and you look at the importance of these cultures and what is going on, I spent time over in the Middle East, more time than I thought I ever would in my life, but I spent a lot of time over there. And one of the things, one of the first places that I learned, you know, going from Port Said and Jeddah, right? And very ancient and old and well-known ports that connect, right? We often, and in your book you talk about that, the original Africa, right?
Mhm.
And how people try to make things into the Middle East because it fits them, it fits the narrative.
Mhm.
But if you look at some of these names like Egypt, Libya, you look at how we migrated there. These are places in Africa. But if I look at Egypt, if I looked at Tunisia, if I look at Saudi Arabia, if I look at Turkey, if I look at places that are more northern, how they have aligned themselves with more of an European mentality. They have ignored, in a lot of ways, their African culture, and that's okay because the mid is very short, and they interact a lot more with the Europeans. But when we look at why I say this is powerful, is because we have to understand that in the midst of all of these places and these cultures are people
Mhm.
who migrated, who touched every part of this planet.
Mhm.
And the children of Ham, and I wanted to talk about this, touched everywhere, right? You
Mhm.
have them in Asia, you got them down in Australia, you got them in the islands, you got them in India, you got them everywhere.
Mhm.
And so I guess my question is, when you were breaking this down, and you did it further in the book where you kind of go into all of the nationalities as we see it, uh, when you saw that, eh, how did that affect you? Because I want the young people out here who are on here to understand why we talk about African culture. How did that affect your mind when you first realized how much we had touched throughout the world, the children of Ham?
You know what? It blew me away, and I'm going to, and I will just say it blew me away, and probably the main reason that it blew me away is because at that time I'd been in the ministry for about 35 years, but when about 30 a little 35 years when I wrote this book. I'd been in ministry over 35 years, and I told the line of the ministry. Now, the line of the ministry was that they're only Jews and Gentiles, right? And so I've been for 35 years totally ignoring the descendants of Ham when their calling and what they did was so important to the structure of the entire earth, of the entire world, to nations. When you actually look at where we and we talked about, I talk in that book about the migration. Now I don't talk about the migratory paths as much as I probably should, and as I'm revising the book, I may include a little bit more of the migratory paths through there. But the focus of this book was to say to our people is that, wait a minute, there were Jews, Gentiles, and indigenous Africans, that we would call them, and they were also children of Ham, the descendants of Ham, and they impacted the world everywhere.
Yes.
They impacted the world everywhere. And I think the scope of this book, though, I think there needs to be another book, right? Or there needs to be, and there probably are other things that exist that talks about the migratory. I know I've got the book Before the Mayflower. They came before the Mayflower. I've got the book When the World Was Black, and both versions of that. So there are other books that you have to kind of deal with to deal with that. But it floored me. It floored me when I found out that indigenous Africans actually made it to North America before Columbus. You know, they were here
Yeah,
before
because
Columbus.
they didn't want us to know any of that.
You didn't know that, right? But then you realize, though, you begin to realize the plan of God and how God laid this out. See, because the indigenous Africans, they did not go out to conquer. They did not go out to
Not the intention.
make people subservient to them. You know, they went out with the mindset of whatever I have that I can help you where you at, I'm going to share that with you.
Yep.
And it's a biblical concept that freely you receive, freely you give, right? And if we can do something to help you, to benefit and to help you, we will, right? And so they did. That's how they went out. They did not go out to take control. They did not go out to enslave or make people servants or get people to serve them. They went out as really as explorers.
Yes.
And to the really explorers, right? Not conquerors, but explorers. And the Japheth seed went out as conquerors. And you can see, even when you look at the table of nations in the 10th chapter of Genesis, the Lord says of Japheth, he's going to be enlarged. He's going to go out and take over these things. He goes out. God doesn't say the right, doesn't say it's the good, but that's exactly how this happened. And so it floored me just to know that our ancestors were so prominent in the making of civilization and in the making of the world. And yet, for 35 years, I've been talking about Jews and Gentiles and not even talking about Africans.
That goes along with what we're talking about, though, that we have to share this history.
Yes.
And you have to parse history. You have to parse it, but you got to share it. You know, I as we're coming about 15 minutes left in this hour, but let me touch on something else here. You know, I wrote this down because as you were talking, I started to think about that, right? I think one of our brothers in one of the books that you mentioned, he tried to explain genetics. And I know some of it, and I think he did a good job for the layman to try to explain it. But when we talk about genetics, right, I was also looking at your book, your new book, Winning Spiritual Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that because see, one thing I don't do is I don't let science fight religion. Because I think science is nothing more than us seeing how amazing things have been done by God. But
exactly,
one of the things that we talk about is our unique code. So we have now understood that we can go back and get DNA, and a lot of historians, a lot of archaeologists, they all look at DNA. But one of the things that I when I look at DNA, I like to look at Adam and I like to look at Eve. And I say, well, you know, God created Adam, and you touch on this in this book, right? Mm-hmm. He created Adam, and we are by Bible spirit. We are spirit and we are flesh, right? Mm-hmm. One thing that I God kind of gave me years ago as I was studying science and history was that when we talk about the earth and we talk about the formation of the universe, all of those things called into being, we have to understand that even in this flesh is parts of that universal creation, right? But even more differently, and this is what I wanted to get to, is that Eve. Because see, once Adam and Eve had their first children, that is a different physical mm-hmm. being that is imparted with spirit. Mm-hmm. But what's important is to show you the science of that. We can trace the female, right? And I'm not going to get into the technical terms of the haplotypes and everything else, but we can trace the female, right? Mm-hmm. DNA all the way back. We can say, man, we can go 200,000 years is what science says. Mm-hmm. But we can't trace it as far back for the male. And people were like, well, you know, what does that? What that means is, to me, is it goes right in alignment, right? Mm-hmm. Because if Adam has a child with Eve, mm-hmm. right, as she is bestowing DNA from her and him into that is a being that carries both of those genetic values.
Yes, he does.
And so when we look at history and science and we go, that's why I thought that your chart was so important, because as we go through and all of these different lineages and lines have children and all this is going on, we can still go back and trace it right to that first original, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, you can.
So how's that? So when people argue, well, why are we saying talking about the Bible when we talk about history? That is your history.
That is. and see, and I love that what you said. We should not science and the Bible, science and the Bible are not 180 degrees out. They're actually synchronized. They're actually together. And so we try to make science fight the Bible, and the Bible fights. It doesn't. This actually works. I think the science is the validator for God and the validator for the Bible. And I like what you said. And if you notice in my book, Biblically Black and Blessed, I think it was Dr. Rebecca Can that actually led a research team. And this was printed in a Newsweek article back in 79. I got it in the book, right? And the name of the article in Newsweek was In Search for Eve, In Search of Eve. And what they did was they took the DNA from hundreds of women worldwide, and then they started to do the scientific work. I'm not a scientist, right? But they started to do the scientific work of backtracking and going back and tracing that DNA back to its original incision point, to its beginning place, right? And what Dr. Can and her research team, what they actually determined then was that Eve was a sub-Saharan woman in the deserts of Africa. And they said, I mean, all scientific evidence, they say, points to Eve being an African.
Yes.
And I mean, I wrote it. I gave a link. I give a reference to the article in the book, right? And it makes sense because the woman has the genetic marker, will have the genetic marker of both the male and of both the father and the mother, right? The father can't have that.
You go.
Once he donates his sperm, then there's no physical connection with that offspring from that point on. It's not like that something can jump back into him. You just can't have it, right?
But if the size fits,
yes, it does.
Fits the Bible,
yes,
right?
it does. Yes, it does.
And this is why I think a lot of times with erudition, I think church folks get mad at me some, right? Because they go, well, you talk about history. History ain't gonna be nice. It's gonna be truthful. Right. And I saw your video earlier today, and I appreciate that because that is the absolute truth. I'm gonna give you fact. Now how you take it, how you feel about it, I can't do nothing about that, right? Yeah. It's gonna be what it's gonna be. I wanna address Daniel's question. He said, I don't want to be political, but I have to ask this question. Why do conservatives tend to hate CRT and liberals tend to embrace it?
Okay, let me give a response before you give one.
Go ahead.
I'll try. First of all, I don't think all conservatives are in that camp where they don't. I think the ones that we see are popular because they obviously I'll be totally honest with you. The ones that we probably say hate CRT, they don't know what CRT is. They just been told to dislike it because it's part of the conservative agenda. And when we talk politics, we're talking power. And people will take positions that they don't believe in. I was listening to a radio a host yesterday that said she stopped having conservatives come on her show because they would come on her show and they would toe the line. And then when the show was over with and they were talking, they said, really, I'm gonna be totally honest with you. These things are right, but we just doing. So she said she stopped having them come on the show because they were actually saying what they were saying, the party or the position that they need for power in the open, but they didn't believe that and they didn't agree with that themselves, right? And I think any person that views life through a clear glass has to agree that the premise and the basic and the core of critical race theory is true, right? I think one of the best things that I can say is that if you just look at history, and I've seen this as a post go around, just look at history, and I can remember in civics class when in history, when you talked about World War II, and you talked about how after World War II, the soldiers came home, and the government gave them loans for houses and built schools and did all that thing, right? And he said, well, that's history. That happened. It didn't happen for Black people. Black people were redlined. They were denied, right? And so critical race theory basically states that the racial injustice is so integrated into society that it dictated how a whole races and classes of people would progress, right? And basically, and how did it dictate? It dictate to them because the systems were inherently set up to benefit, set up for the benefit of one group and for the demise of others. And that's all the critical race theory. And I don't think you can look at history truly through a clear glass and say that's not true. Yeah. Okay, that's mine.
No, that's a great. You had a great point. It is a system, and we have to. And a lot of people don't like it, right? I was on, I think Mike Wilder's show recently, and I was making a point that you have to also understand that critical race theory is not. See, the conservatives are some are angry about it, but it also questions liberalism. It also questions the laws, the things that you call yourself to be rights. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to link both for you, Daniel, a little briefly. This reminded me, because we were just talking about genetics. It reminds me of the Pastor Ray, I'm sure, has probably read about the pre-Adamites. And if you don't know what that is, these are people who thought, white people, they taught it. There was a group of them, large group, pre-Adams, who said that we, Blacks, they agreed that Black people came before whites, but they considered us to be beasts, beasts of the field. We were not human. And so they said that Adam was white. Adam and Eve were white, right? And this was taught. College professors, learned men taught this. Then they went further to say, well, now we are reclaiming Adam, and we are going to be, you got into the nudism, right? We want to be naked and nice as Adam. We ain't going to wear clothes. You had all of that going on. And at the heart of it was racism, right? Because at the same time that they were saying, yeah, Black man, you came before us, because they saw it coming. Because see, as I always say, I'll tell people with history, especially on Erudition, history is not lost, it's hidden, right? And some people, they know where it is. So some of these folks knew, right? And so as Pastor Razor was saying, some of these folks knew. There's a man named Alexander Winchell. Look that man up, right? And they knew that this was a lie. But they pushed the system to have a reason to marginalize people of color, specifically Blacks. So they use religion, politics, and whatever to do that. And some of them can be slick about it. So even though you had your rights back in those late 1800s, early 1900s, you still a beast. And does a beast have rights? That's how people think on a local level. So, and linking both of those things on what we just talked about and going into your question, that is why I believe critical race theory is so important, and why we do, but we have to vet what we talk. Pastor Razor, I saw the video that you sent me with the young lady, and that's another part of it. The cultism of, because that's really what that is, where we get so caught up in the logic of something, right, that we lose ourselves in the spiritual nature or the morality, right, of what we're doing. When we tell people that you are evil, no, as we just talked about, we all related. We all got the same blood. We don't want to admonish a lot of us, but we all have it. And if we delve into evil just as those who put the evil on us, then how does that make us any better?
Yep.
Well, we're about to close on this, but I'm gonna let you close with anything you want to say. This has been a good hour. I know it was a lot to unpack. So I was like, man, I don't know what we're gonna talk about, but I think this has been a really good hour. But I'm gonna leave the last couple of minutes to you as we get ready to close out on this session.
Well, I just say it's a great hour. I think it's a good work that you're doing. I want you to keep doing the work. Definitely keep doing the work. I'm with you. I'm following you, and I'm there as much as I possibly can. And we're going to collaborate. We're going to do some things together. I'm really want to bring you to Chicago for an in-person conference as we can, if we can get this pulled off by next year. But hey, as we go forward, hey, I just want my message to the world is that, let's be sane, and let's look at this through clear glasses, and let's look at this as true believers, or as true Christians, or as humans. Because in this Winning Spiritual War book, I spent a lot of time talking about the power that God has given you as a human.
Yes.
Regard. So let's look at this as true as humans. And when you actually look at all together, and you hook it all up together, we're one race. And that is the human race. And I think we need to go forward as that one race. The only way we're going to go forward is that we're going to have to go forward as that one race. But I want to say to everyone that's looking, my latest book, Winning Spiritual Wars, Unleashing the Power of the Soul. I don't care what you are, who you are, what you believe. God created you as body, soul, and spirit. And if you realize and understand the power that he gives you, and I think Dr. Eddie talked a little bit about the pre-Adam people being beasts, being creatures, right? I talk about that in the book. And see, I call them creatures. I don't call them people, right? And we talk a little bit about that in the book. But can I say this? And this is why I'm such a stickler on certain things, because when we say Jews and Gentiles, that was part of that message you talked about. If Black people aren't humans, then we don't include them. That's why we haven't included Africans. We just said Jews and Gentiles, because that was the theology that they had. As I told our church, that was another thing that we say all the time in church: God is in control. Well, this was something afterwards that the slave masters or the slave owners would tell the slaves, well, God is in control. Just pray. In other words, the reason you're a slave is because God put you there, and God made you there. So you just pray, and when you just pray, and blah blah. And so a lot of that came forward. But when we actually view this through clear lenses, we see that we are God's creation. We are God's people. And that's not Black people. That's not white people. That's not red people. That's not yellow people. That's all people. And I think, to me, Rebecca Can, when they did their research, they did an excellent job. And I went and looked this up elsewhere and did the research after I read that article about how the pigmentation of the skin changed as people migrated. And as they migrated to different paths, they became lighter and more hairier. Because it was colder. As they migrated to areas, they became darker and less hairier, because their sun and the darker skin, it dealt with the ultraviolet rays better. And how God, to me, it's amazing that God could create the human body that could adapt to certain conditions
and could change,
and change, and based upon that. So she did some awesome research on that. And I think that research validates everything that's written from Genesis to Revelation.
You said so. So I was going, give me 2 minutes. Let me tell you something. I read your book, and I would be remiss to not mention this. And my wife, her great uncle is the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, or was the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth that sat with Dr. King, worked with Dr. King. And I was reading, because that's like I said, it's one of my favorite books. We can't wait. But I was reading the part of your book, the beginning, and you're talking about, and I'm talking about the new one, right? Mm-hmm. The Winning Spiritual Wars. And you're talking about how to prepare SOT. Right, that's how I look at it as a military person, strategic operations, tactical, how you fight. Mm-hmm. But I was reading this part of this book, and I want to share this with you, so you understand how powerful what you wrote is for the people out here, for the people of God. I was reading about Reverend Charles Billups. people know who Bull Connor is. Bull Connor, during the time we see the old footage of them turning on the fire hoses. And I was reading in the book how they turned fire hoses up so high, it could knock bricks off the wall, it could strip bark off the tree. And they were doing it on kids who were 7 to 8 years old and grown. And my wife's great uncle got hit in the chest with it, caused a chest injury. He hit a wall. But Reverend Billups, one day, after all this was going on, Bull Connor was murderous. They were going to make a march to the police precinct because people were in jail. And as they walked, Bull Connor said, turn on the D hoses, let the dogs go. And Dr. King in that book specifically talks about how they had prayed, they had prepared, right? And you talk about this in this book. You need to read this book and how when they walked up to meet that enemy, and he told them, turn them hoses on. These was racist men that was holding them hoses. They'd already unleashed it. Dr. King said a miracle happened. They the men didn't do anything. It's like they was caught in a they didn't know what to do. And they walked right past them. And he said, and it changed the mentalities of these people. So when we talk about prayer, we talk about preparation. I wanted to let you know that is a powerful part of that book, ladies and gentlemen. And you need to read that to understand that. I would have been remiss if I would not have mentioned that. All right. Pastor Razor, I know you got a lot going on, and I appreciate the hour or so that you spent with us. Thank you so much. You're always welcome back on Erudition at any given time. And I thank you so much for coming on to be with us today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
All right. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We will see you next week. Later. Thank you, Pastor Razor.
Okay. God bless you.